Now, South Africa's official unemployment rate increased to 32.9% in the first quarter of 2025. This is from 31.9% in the last quarter of 2024. According to Statistics South Africa, the number of employed people decreased by 291,000 to 16.8 million quarter on quarter. Those without jobs increased by 237,000 to 8.2 million. Joining us is Thando Lukhele, the Deputy President of the Youth Business Chamber. Thando, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us. In your view, how does the level of youth unemployment impact the socio-economic development of our communities?
Thank you for having me, Katleho. So it's to a large extent, right? If the youth is unemployed, there's no development in the communities. So the general socioeconomic development is dependent largely on how many people get employed, how many people get access to the economy, and therefore how much they can actually give back. But if we have a large backlog of youth that is unemployed, it means there's no food on the families or no food on the tables for families. So it's a catch-22 situation, but I do think we find ourselves in a very tough situation as a country.
As a chamber, the discussions that you often have with young people, what are you finding to be at the heart of this? Do we have a skills shortage or a job shortage that is pushing these unemployment numbers so high?
Both. Both. So the first thing, or the first driver towards this large unemployment rate is mainly the lack of economic growth, right? So if the economy is stagnant and South Africa's economy is not growing, there's no job creation, or there's no space for young people to have jobs. But outside of job creation, there is a lot of inability to access capital as well. So there's also socio-economic lack of access, or the lack of access via lack of access of capital, and young people are not able to access capitals even if they wanted to start their own business. But also there is a mismatch of skills as well. It's not necessarily that we don't have young people that are skilled, but are they skilled for the right sense of the market right now? What is the market demanding right now? And how are we equipping as a country those people to be able to meet the demands of the markets? Are we actually moving towards a digital age? Do we have enough colleges? Do we have enough education sectors? Do we have enough institutions to be able to equip young people as well? So it's largely a lot of things contributing all at once.
It certainly is. I mean, it's government's responsibility to create a conducive environment for that economic growth that you speak about. What role do you think the private sector, as well as small business, should be playing in creating those jobs, especially for young people?
I do think that primarily it's the government that's supposed to create such an environment, but private sectors does play a role as well. I mean, for starters, if there is a lot of skilled young people that are being held up or not getting jobs because they don't have experience, and a lot of companies or private sectors are hiring people with experience, or hiring people who have been in the company for a long time, there's no shift in skills. That's the first thing. So the first thing would be that the private sector really needs to introduce mentorship programs, really needs to introduce programs that actually target young people, including small businesses and small enterprises. But I do think largely we can't depend too much on the private sector to expect them to do that automatically. There needs to be some government policies that drive that level of engagement of the private sector to the youth unemployment rate. So the private sector does need to open up its spaces, right? Including things like mentorship programs, including things like funding the young people for starting their own small to medium enterprises. So I do think they can play that big role in mentorship, big role in actually guiding people, or young people, to the pathway of entrepreneurship, but also opening up their doors to young people in their businesses.
So you're saying essentially, if government is not pushing private sector in a way that it should, then the private sector would not be responding in such a way that it would absorb a lot of young people in as much as that they should?
Definitely. I do think I mean, we have an expectation of the private sector to play a key role in society, but they are not obliged to, right? They don't have that obligation. So I do think to some extent the government really needs to assist in pushing that collaboration in the sense that they could promote things like tax breaks, um, improvement cards, and get some sort of ways in which the private sector can play a role. So I do think the government should drive that type of collaboration. I don't think the private sector automatically will just wake up and understand what is needed by the communities. But I do understand as well that in some private sectors they do drive force or do play a role on their own automatically to those kind of issues. So I think it's in between, but I do think government can push or assist in pushing the private sector to create that type of space for the young people.
As a chamber and just with your engagements with various spaces and sectors, which sectors do you think are showing more promise in absorbing some of these young people, especially within the climate that we see when it comes to there being no jobs available, especially for young people?
Um, it's a variety. Some of our most strategic partnerships you wouldn't think of. We have partnered with the South African Mining Youth Association, for example, right? Where you think young people are not interested in the mining space and actually they are. So I do think with in terms of our partnerships, you'd find that young people are interested in driving most of the technical spaces as well. Young people are taking up digital marketing, they're taking up digital literacy programs, IT, technology related fields. So I do think those spaces, especially because that is also the current demand in the market, are growing in terms of absorbing young people, but also young people are also largely showing interest in that space or in those sectors as well. So with our partnerships, with our engagements with young people, we see those trails or those interests, the growing interest in the technical aspects of life, in the more mining related fields, engineering related fields, IT, computer sciences, marketing. So those fields are finding itself and finding a growing interest in the space.
And entrepreneurship, I mean, we often hear that this is the lifeline to any economy, and it's also one way in which a lot of people can be able to find jobs. Are you finding that there is an interest and also support for young people that are looking to become entrepreneurs?
Just yes. I think there's a lot of young people with a lot of amazing business ideas. Support in between. I mean, what you need to effectively start a business outside of your business proposal and your business ideas is actually the capital, right? So and understanding the inequalities within that country would understand that not everyone has that capital. So I do think there's a growing interest in young people starting their own business. They have amazing business ideas. It's just with support, we don't support them enough as a country, as a space to be able to carry through those ideas. Even some of the programs the country introduced are not as sustainable as we'd hope them to believe. They somehow are short-term gigs. So I do think we need to extend our level of support in terms of assisting young people on capital, assisting them on how to actually grow a small to medium enterprise to a franchise, how to linking them with the relevant people and within the spaces as well. So it's understanding that someone from Ekai Licha who has no access to capital, has or no access to a former business owner, how do they get from that to being someone who owns a big entity like Standard Bank or Bowmans? So it's those links and how do we create those links? And I do think that that is the vacuum largely. The vacuum is not the lack of ideas. The vacuum is the support we give and extend to these people with the ideas.
So then, Thando, how can young people better themselves in a very competitive job market? What do you think they need to do in order for them to be able to put their best foot forward?
That's a difficult question. What I think we need to do as young people is obviously one thing is we need to start by taking or accessing the relevant fields. right? How do we do that? Either through the education sector, or the business sector, but how do we equip ourselves first with the relevant skills that are essential with the current market? There is a growing in technology, there is a growing in AI and AI related technology. How do we equip ourselves as young people so that we are better prepared for that space? And we don't find ourselves in a situation where saying AI is taking our jobs, but we're actually in the forefront of driving artificial intelligence in our space. So I think firstly it's acquiring the relevant skills, right? It's looking at to what is essential right now for growing of the country, of growing of the economy, and how, as a young person, play that critical role. How do I drive that forth? So it's accessing the right skills first, but on top of that, I think it's trying to be in the right spaces. It's a sad reality that young people right now, outside of being in the right spaces, don't necessarily get the right equipment. So trying to speak to business owners, be it it's within your area, be it it's outside of your area, right? Watching business seminars, watching people actually speak about how they're able to drive that forth, how they're able to write that business proposal, because at the end of the day, you do need those skills as well. So learning what is actually essential to be able to start that business.
Most
Then I think
definitely.
if you have the idea, you have it jotted down, you have it structured, you have the plans, you've learned the financials behind it, it's so much easier to say, hey, I have this, who's willing to fund me? And somewhere within the space, there are people possibly out there within the country who are saying, here's that 2 million, here's that 5
So
million,
it's
I'm willing
about
to offer
taking
you.
that proactive approach. Well, Thando, we have run out of time.
Definitely,
Thank
definitely.
you so much for joining us this afternoon and just giving that advice, especially to young people and the policies that government really needs to look into in order for the private sector to also play their part. That was Thando Lukhele, the Deputy President of the Youth Business Chamber.